Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Sorry? After prayers. Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today evening program. Kindly excuse us for the delay. Our team is still working on the system. So, okay, thank you. Thank you for joining in. Hare Krishna. We'll start with prayers and then we'll begin with presentation. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatai Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna. So kindly let us know if the audio is fine. Am I audible? Okay, great. And just one second. Hare Krishna. Yes, okay. So let's start with our presentation. So today we'll be starting with the third section of Bhagavad Gita. So just a quick introduction. This is, one second, please. Okay, yeah, fine. A little screen got hanged at my side, so just excuse me for a quick second. Fine, let's continue. So we are discussing Gita Essence, which is an overview of Bhagavad Gita based on the teachings of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. So today we're going to start with our chapter 13 of Bhagavad Gita, which forms the basis of this particular section, the last section of Bhagavad Gita, the Jnana Yoga section. It forms the basis of the last 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, which are kind of described as Jnana Yoga. As we discussed before, Bhagavad Gita is divided into 3 parts. First 6 chapters, 1 to 6, Karma Yoga. Then 7 to 12, Bhakti Yoga. And now we are on 13 to 18th chapter, which will be starting a discussion from today, forms a part of Jnana Yoga. What is this Jnana which is being described here? It's called as transcendental wisdom. So this particular chapter 13, which is titled as Nature, the Enjoyer and Consciousness, it ain't going to discuss something new. The concepts have already been discussed in the past, which means in the previous chapters. However, here, Lord Shri Krishna, through the analytical and more detailed discussion of the subject matters which had been discussed before, Krishna will be elaborating on those subject matters in this particular chapter. And the idea of the subject matter is, or this discussion which would happen here, is to help us become detached from material aspirations, we can call it desires, and simultaneously become attached to Krishna. So this subject matter of Jnana Yoga, or Jnana, which we're going to discuss in this chapter onwards, the aim of this is to help the listeners as well as the readers to strengthen their conviction and also to deepen their understanding of life. So let us begin with this discussion with an acronym for this chapter, where the acronym for this chapter stands for WISE, where W stands for wise questions. So here in chapter 13, Arjuna starts with an inquiry where he asks 6 very important questions to Lord Shri Krishna. And Arjuna says, Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Kshetram kshetrajnam cha etad veditum ichchami jnanam neyam cha keshavaha. In the words, here Arjuna says that, my dear Lord, I have a query and I have a 6 questions to ask to you. He asks about Prakritim, what is Prakritim, what is Purusha, what is Kshetrajna, and Jnanam and Gneyam. And the third line says, Etad Veditum Ichchami, I am desiring to understand this concept. Okay, so here these are the 6 queries or inquiries of Arjuna. Prakriti, Purusha, Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Jnanam, and Gneyam. So just to give you a little bit of introduction to the subject matter, so you are prepared to receive what is about to happen now. This 13th chapter, the questions which are asked by Arjuna here, forms the foundation, or I can say rather, are the key components of Vedic knowledge or of Vedic scriptures. Hare Krishna. Okay. Sorry, there was just something internal discussion going on here. Okay, so here, Arjuna, the kind of questions Arjuna have asked, it is described as it forms the key components of Vedic scriptures. In other words, all of our Vedas like Riga, Yajur, Atharva, Samaved, and all those great descriptions that Srila Vyasadeva had written describing the whole Vedic knowledge, the foundation, the key components and the subject matters are given here in terms of a question asked by Arjuna. Now, who was Arjuna? Arjuna was a highly qualified and greatly learned person. In other words, in those times, until 18th century, everyone would go to Gurukul. So don't we think that Arjuna had gone to Gurukul, had studied all Vedic scriptures? Yes, he did study it. Then why is he asking these questions, which are kind of a foundational questions for any student of a Gurukul? So here our acharyas explain that actually Arjuna, through this kind of a astute inquiries, he is inspiring and encouraging Lord Shri Krishna to speak on the great mysteries of life. And considering the benefit of humanity at large, therefore Arjuna put forward such kind of questions as if he is an ignorant man, but that's not the fact. He knows the purpose of life. He knows who Krishna is. Anyways, he has declared Krishna just in the 10th chapter. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's the whole idea, that Arjuna is an established transcendentalist, and he's making these inquiries for our sake. And this 13th chapter, which I would say is a little difficult, maybe I'm a little not truthful to you. It's not a little difficult, it's a little more difficult. I guess I'm still not very truthful to you. It's the most difficult chapter of Bhagavad Gita. I guess now I'm truthful to all of you. If you don't trust me, go ahead, after even our discussion, take out this chapter and read the verses. You'll get an idea what's going on, what is being discussed about Kshetra, Kshetragyan, Purusha, Prakriti, Jnanam, Gneyam. Even after our little humble attempt to help you understand the subject, it will still take a little bit of endeavor to understand it. So let's begin with the subject matter and let's see what Krishna gives an answer. So in the first section, which means wise questions, which we're discussing here, Lord Shri Krishna is going to discuss about Kshetra, Kshetragya, and Jnanam, transcendental knowledge, or the process of knowledge, Jnanam. That is what is going to be discussed. So let's begin with it. So what is Kshetra and what is Kshetragya? Kshetra refers to a body, the field of activities, and Kshetragya, Gya means knower. Who is the knower of this body? The knower of this body is Atma. However, in this discussion, in this chapter, Lord Shri Krishna describes the knower of the body is not only Atma, but also Paramatma. So there are two knowers within us. One is called Atma, and second is called as Paramatma. And third subject matter is Jnana. And what is Jnana? Jnana is to understand what is Kshetra and Kshetragya, and also to understand the relationship between two Kshetragyas. Who are the two Kshetragyas? Atma and Paramatma. To give you an example, for instance, as you see up on the screen here, a farmer sowing a seed in an agricultural land, in a farming land. So if this agricultural land is compared to kshetra, kshetra is a field of activity where farmer sows the seeds in an agricultural land, where means a farmer performs an activity. So if agricultural land is compared to a body, then what is farmer is compared to? Is compared to a kshetragya. Just like a farmer knows what he has sowed into the ground, similarly, kshetragya knows about the self, about the body in that context. However, the difference between kshetragya, which means the Atma and Paramatma, is that just like a farmer and the king, the farmer knows only about its own land, which means Atma knows only about one's own body. Whereas when we go back again to the analogy of farmer and the king knows about all the lands. Similarly, Paramatma knows about all the bodies, all the kshetras. So that's the difference. So Atma is localized in a concept, knows only about this kshetra, whereas Paramatma, who is the source of all, knows about all the kshetras. And that's the difference between kshetra and kshetragya. And we'll discuss that ahead also. So I hope this little example makes it clear. This is an example that Srila Prabhupada gives in the purport. And to tell you seriously, I mean, it might sound a little easy for you, right, to hear it, but this one subject matter to understand, there is two kshetragyas, Atma and Paramatma. Just this subject matter have deluded people from the beginning of the time, where many people, while studying scriptures, they end up considering themselves to be Paramatma, and they consider there is no difference between Atma and Paramatma. And their conclusion often turns out to be when an Atma, which means when a person performs meditation, performs Ashtanga yoga or any other yoga practice, then by the process of yoga, he can become Paramatma. So it's not such an easy subject matter in that sense, but fortunately for us, by the grace of Srila Prabhupada, we can easily understand the subject matter. So this subject matter goes ahead, and Lord Shri Krishna goes into a little more detail about Kshetra, because Kshetra has been defined right in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Lord Shri Krishna says the body is different than Atma. And here in this particular chapter, in the follow-up verses, I believe verse number 5 to verse number 7 of 13th chapter, Lord Shri Krishna further speaks about the Kshetra and says the Kshetra is made up of 24 elements. As you all can see on your screen, there are 5 gross elements: earth, water, fire, ether, of which the body is made up of, external body. Then we have knowledge acquiring senses. This is again part of the body, and then the working senses. So these 15 comprises the gross body. And then we have the subtle body, as you can see up on the screen, mind, intelligence, false ego. And then we have sense objects. Like this is what called as a Sankhya Yoga, to do an analytical study of this material nature. So that's not the subject matter for us to get into detail. So we are doing an overview. So just to touch upon it, this is how this creation is divided into 24 elements. And these 24 elements are the founding elements, or the foundation of this whole massive creation that we see around us. So when Lord Shri Krishna defined what is Kshetra and Kshetragya, Kshetra means the field of activity, that is body, and Gnya means the knower, that is Atma and Paramatma. Then Arjuna began to think, and he thought, my dear Lord, how do we think or how do we cultivate this knowledge? Generally what is seen is the people are so entangled and so caught up in the idea that I am this body. How many of you agree that our day-to-day experience further strengthens the idea that I'm actually a body? I'm nothing else than a body. So here Arjuna begins to wonder, my dear Lord, I appreciate you telling that I'm different than the Kshetra, but how do one acquire this knowledge? How do I get this wisdom that I am not same as my body? And this brings us to the second subject matter, which is called as items for knowledge, from verses number 8 to 12 of this chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So here, this verses from verse number 8 to 12 describe how Kshetragya, which means spirit soul, can disentangle oneself or himself or herself from the kshetra by cultivating knowledge. So here is my question to all of you. What is knowledge? Can I request the host to show the poll? So they have the poll. What is knowledge? We'll have few options for all of you just to interact. Okay. All right. So I'll request the host to manage it as I won't be able to see it. Fine. So we can give them some time. So you can see there are 4 options given if I'm correct. One is gaining information. Second is memorization. And third is good character and practical behavior. And fourth, all of the above. So I believe most of you would have done it by now. Is it good? Can we conclude and move forward? Can we see the results? What's the result of it?
Yes, sure.
Can you read it out because I can see it?
First is gaining information is 18%.
What's the maximum?
Maximum is all of them.
All of the above. Okay.
For good character, they are 21%.
And what about other two?
Memorization 0. Good character 21. Gaining information 18.
Okay, great. So as you can all see, looks like most of you have said all of the above. Let's see what Lord Shri Krishna has to describe what is knowledge. Let's take a look ahead. So what is knowledge? Knowledge is not about information and memorization. I'll give you an example to help you understand this. But rather it is about exemplary personal behavior and conduct. Isn't it? Think about it. Why do we send kids to school? To learn good values, to become a better citizen? Isn't that the purpose of education actually all about? So that an uneducated, which means uncivilized, which means when a child is born in this world, he has no manners, has no values, has no idea about good conduct. So we send a child to school so he learns about all these things, and from being an uncivilized, he becomes civilized, right? We don't know even how to wash ourselves. We are taught even basic things. That's the whole point about it. That's the purpose of education. However, I would leave on to you to decide if our education today has fulfilled this purpose or is helping to fulfill this purpose. But here I'll give you one example. And this is from Second World War. One of the Jew who survived the concentration camps, I believe all of you would have heard of this concentration camps, which were run by Hitler to brutally kill the Jews because Hitler hated Jews, and that's the history, not going into details of it. So here this survivor, this Jew who survived the concentration camp, after a couple of years, after overcoming the shock that he underwent, then he wrote a letter. It's a very famous letter where this Jew says, what is the status of education? What does our modern education have done? And he writes, our modern education has deprived us of human values. Why? And he further writes, he said, and in those concentration camps where I was admitted, I saw highly qualified doctors performing brutal experiments on live captives. They were torturing us and doing all kinds of experiments. Is this what education is meant to produce? Vicious animals in the garb of humans. In essence, knowledge is not about information, but about transformation. Yes or no? Which means to become a civilized person. So here, I would start with my question on the subject matter. Who can understand Bhagavad Gita? And we have a poll for it. I'll request the host to take another opinion from you again. Who can understand Bhagavad Gita? And you can see in the poll, there are two I guess, options given. One is a drunkard PhD scholar or a metric fail, but a man of good character. All right, just take an opinion. Maybe a little extreme ends, but I thought to have it. So let's see to get your opinion. Is that all right? A drunkard PhD scholar, you know, and another person is a metric fail, which means he's not even 12th graduate, you know, but a man of good character. What would you say? What's the output?
Second option. Metric fail, but an 100%.
Okay, say that. I need to status. You're telling me the options. So, okay, great. So all of you all agree that's the purpose of education. Not the purpose of education, sorry. The question is, who can understand Bhagavad Gita? And I believe all of you are able to make this point because we already saw Krishna telling Arjuna that Arjuna, I have chosen you to give this knowledge because you are non-envious. A character counts. So who can understand Bhagavad Gita? Let's do a comparison between character versus caliber. When we talk about education, which is given to us today, the education that we take in our schools and colleges, it ain't depends on character. Yes or no? It depends on caliber. It depends on our capacity to gather information and to memorize concepts and spit it out during the exam hall. In other words, you call it vomit it out in the exam hall. That's our caliber. So whoever is as expert in vomiting, I'm sorry to use that language, I mean to say expert in recalling and writing is said to be a brilliant student. However, spiritual knowledge is not dependent on caliber. Oh, I didn't pay ahead. So success in academic depends on caliber, not character. But spiritual subject matters have very less to do with caliber. They have a lot to do with character. You remember in Bhagavad Gita, 10th chapter, 10th verse, Lord Shri Krishna says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te. In other words, Lord Shri Krishna says, I give intelligence by which you can come to me. And on what basis it depends on? As we discussed, it depends entirely on one's character. To give you an example, it's a true story from Russia. I mean, a couple of examples can be given. Let me just give a little bit one example from the history. And that is of when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was personally present around 550 years ago. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was on the tour of South India, and one of the cities in South India, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came across a Brahmin who was not educated. However, he was holding a copy of Bhagavad Gita in his hands and he was shedding tears. And around him, there were many learned Brahmins who were standing and they were laughing when they looked at him. What is he doing? So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a little surprised. He walked up to him, and when he walked nearby him, he became even more surprised. And he saw that this Brahmin is holding Bhagavad Gita upside down. He's not even holding Bhagavad Gita correctly. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a little confused. He said he doesn't even know how to hold Bhagavad Gita. Then what is he reading? Of course, he cannot read. Then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked that Brahmin, why are you crying? And this Brahmin said, my dear sir, I don't know how to read, but my spiritual master have asked me, have given me an instruction to read every day. So following the instruction of my Gurudev, I every day open this copy of Bhagavad Gita, but I don't know what is front, what is back, what is top, what is bottom, because I have never learned reading and writing. However, I know one thing, or I remember one thing whenever I hold copy of Bhagavad Gita. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very attentive. He said, yes, I'm listening. What is that? And the Brahmin said, whenever I hold a copy of Bhagavad Gita, immediately a vision comes in front of my eyes, and that is a vision of Partha Sarthi. Well, Lord Shri Krishna had become a charioteer of his devotee Arjuna. And this devotee says, or Brahman said, how great is my Lord, who being a supreme personality of Godhead, decided to become a servant of his devotee. Knowing this, remembering this situation, I cry out of the feeling of joy that how kind and compassionate my Lord is. And when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu heard this, he immediately embraced that Brahman and said, actually, you have understood the tattva or the science of Bhagavad Gita. Now, interesting, this person was not even educated. He didn't even know how to hold the book up and down. Yet, he understood the subject matter of Bhagavad Gita because of his sincerity of purpose in following the instruction of his guru. Of course, integrity is a part of character, and that's how character counts. To give you just one more example, it's a true story, as I said. I'll give you one ancient example and one recent example. It's a story from Russia, which is just recently, which we came across. Our one of, as ISKCON devotees, we go out and distribute Bhagavad Gitas. So on a particular day in one of the Muslim cities, our book distributors had gone. They were passing by the city, so they thought they'll stop by and try out distributing Bhagavad Gita. So 2, 3 brahmacharis were standing for almost whole day, but not even a single person came by or stopped by them to inquire what they were doing or to give them or show interest in Bhagavad Gita. So after standing for a few hours, they decided to wind up and go back to their bus and then push off to a different city. However, at that point of time, this particular monk saw there were 3, 4 ladies standing, or 3, 4 ladies, or maybe there were 2 ladies standing on the other side of the road, and they were looking at this man or this devotee or a monk for a good amount of time. And when this devotee turned around, he was going away. One of the lady came running up to him, and she was dressed in a burqa, the traditional Muslim attire. She was clad and she was dressed in burqa, and she came to him and she said, "Do you have the book titled as Song of God?" This monk was surprised. He said, "Yes, I have this book." He gave the book to her, and she said, "I'm sorry, I'm a very, very poor lady. I don't have much, but whatever savings I have," he had a little pot, "whatever savings I have, I'm giving it to you. I hope you will accept this." And the monk was even far much more overwhelmed. He said, "Yes, I'll accept it, but I have a question to you. How do you know the name of this book? This is for the first time we have come to this village or the town. How did you got to know about this book?" And this lady said something very incredible. And she said, "I had been a devout Muslim all my life. I had always prayed to Allah. And recently I had been praying to Allah to give me more direction, give me more, show me the path, to have a better understanding about you, to know who you are." Like that, she said, "I had been praying, and last night Allah came in my dream. And he told me that tomorrow at so and so time, you will find a monk dressed in an attire like this and go and ask him for a book titled Song of God." So even Allah is doing preaching. It's a true story. Yeah, even Allah is encouraging you to read Bhagavad Gita. And that's the whole subject matter here. In other words, to a little bit sum up this discussion of knowledge, the real method of acquiring spiritual knowledge is the cultivation of divine qualities, of which humility is foremost. I'll briefly discuss about this. And when we commit to spiritual lifestyle, then we simultaneously develop these divine qualities. So let's look into the first point. That is, acquiring spiritual knowledge is the real method of acquiring spiritual knowledge is cultivation of divine knowledge, as cultivation of divine qualities. For example, humility is said to be the foremost. How do we cultivate knowledge? Krishna says, "Take shelter of Guru. Tadvidi pranipatena." We have to approach a Guru, take his shelter. Just like Arjuna in second chapter, verse number 7 says, "Shishasyam sadimam tvam prapannam." Do you think it is very easy to say that I accept you, my Guru? Now you can tell me what I'm supposed to do? We are used to saying, "Hell with you. I don't need to listen to you." That is what the modern environment have done to us. We are not here to say that, "Yes, I'm willing to follow you." That's not the part of the culture today. But that requires humility. As the saying goes, the trees which are laden with fruits always bend low. The trees which don't have any fruits, they stand erect. I hope you got the message. Where fruits represents qualities. Those who have qualities, they're always, in other words, those who have knowledge or the qualities, they're both more or less in the parallel connection, they're always humble, they're bent low. Where they have no good qualities, they only have mundane knowledge, they become proud of their knowledge of the wisdom. And that's the point here. And last, when we commit to the spiritual lifestyle, then we simultaneously develop divine qualities, which means, as you discussed about Krishna conscious culture, when we take to this lifestyle of the following of regulative principles, taking to the process of ABCD formula, which we have discussed in the past, then by this lifestyle we develop naturally the qualities. Prahlad Maharaj says, Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati yakinchana sarve gunes tatra samasate suraha. One who engages in spiritual culture, he naturally develops all the divine qualities. And that's the subject matter here. So here in this subject matter of items of knowledge, Lord Shri Krishna from verse number 8 to 12 defines 20 items of knowledge. I would give you a brief one-line gist of it. However, I would request you all to please read the purport out for yourself. So what is humility? Humility means not to be anxious, to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. That is the meaning of humility. What is pridelessness? Not to be anxious to become famous for one's accomplishments or even for one's practice of religion. What is non-violence? Interesting thing, not to put others in distress and not to deprive others from spiritual practice. What is tolerance? Practice to bear insult and dishonor from others, not to have a revengeful attitude. What is simplicity? Straightforward. Even if it comes to an enemy, being straightforward with enemy. When we do this details discussion on this subject matter, we give an example in terms of a story for each, but that's not the, we don't have time, it's a summary. 6, accepting a spiritual master, which means, approaching him, submissively inquiring from him. And as I said, inquiry should be accompanied with the service. As we render service, then our inquiry becomes more meaningful. Cleanliness, saucha means external cleanliness, which means taking bath. I'm just saying, in the Western countries, people don't take bath. And I mean, as far as I know, the modern youth also doesn't take much bath. It has become a bi-monthly event or a summer vacation kind of a thing. And internal cleanness, which means purity, not having anger, envy, lust like that. Then comes steadiness, which means determined to make progress in spiritual life. Self-control, which means to reject anything which is unfavorable to the practice of spiritual culture. 10th, renunciation of sense objects, which means not to have unnecessary demands. Have demands which fulfills the basic needs of life, but to make our desires as our needs is what it means by renunciation of sense objects. 11th, false ego, absence of false ego. And ahankara, 11th, which means false ego means to consider I am the controller, proprietor, enjoyer, and the foremost idea is I am the body. So to understand I'm not the body but spirit, soul, part and parcel of the Lord. Perceptions of evil, janma, mrityu, jara, vyadhi, to have an understanding of the evils of birth, death, old age, and disease that is only possible through regular hearing and reading of Vedic scriptures. Detachment, 13. Detachment or asakti, which means willing to sacrifice the fruits of one's hard work in the service of the Lord. 14th, no entanglement. Now, no entanglement here, I mean, affection is natural. So no entanglement refers here if in case our friendship, our duty to society and nation and family becomes a hindrance to a practice of spiritual culture, which is the most important subject matter, then we should renounce from those activities. Even-mindedness, sukhe dukhe samay kritva, be equal to both distress and happiness. 16th, which is the most important subject matter, if we engage in devotional service, all other items of knowledge are cultivated automatically. 17th, solitary place, which means to live in the association of devotees. Detachment from the general mass of people, the 18th item, which means to keep away from bad association. 19th, accepting the importance of self-realization, which means giving up unnecessary activities which waste our time. I will leave that as a homework for you to decide what are the activities which do not help in elevating your consciousness, rather degrades. If you would like, you can take a few seconds to write down those activities, beginning with maybe social media and etc. for you to decide and think which does not elevate our consciousness, rather degrades it. And the last, philosophical search of absolute truth, which means to utilize the God-given intelligence to search and study and discuss the subject matter of absolute truth and the soul, like this. So, after describing Kshetra, Kshetragya, and Jnanam, Jnanam means the process of knowledge, how to acquire, how to understand the Kshetra and Kshetragya different. Now, Lord Shri Krishna answers the fourth question, that is Gnayam, which means the object of knowledge. And that brings us to the third subject matter of chapter 13th, titled as Soul and Super Soul. So, congratulations. You're halfway through the study of Vedic literatures. We are halfway through the 13th chapter. So, you're almost halfway done your Vedic study. So, Soul and Super Soul, verse number 13 to verse number 19. In this particular section, 13th to 19th verses, Lord Shri Krishna describes the features of Atma and Paramatma. What is Atma? As Lord Shri Krishna already described in the 20th verse of second chapter, Najayate imriyete va kadachin nayam bhutva bhavitva nabhaya ajo nitya shashvatoyam purano nahanyate hanyamane sharire. Nayam bhutva bhavitva nabhaya. It has never come into existence and would never cease to exist. It's Purana, is beginningless, is Anadi. I mean, it's not said Anadi there, like that. So, point is, the soul is eternal. And here, Lord Shri Krishna says beginningless, which means you cannot put a time tag. Like all of us have a time tag now, what is called as birth date and birth time. So, there's no birth time for the soul. That's the meaning of beginningless. Now, how do you define infinity? You can't define infinity. That is what means infinity. You cannot put a time tag. That's the meaning of beginningless. Second thing, Lord Shri Krishna speaks about Atma as Mat Param. It's my part and parcel. And third is beyond material cause and effect. It is never affected in terms of it is spiritual, so it never gets contaminated. However, it gets covered over by material energy. That's the different thing, but it doesn't get contaminated. That's the point here. And finally, Krishna says, one who can understand the nature of the soul like this, the result of it, the person would be all blissful. All of our anxieties and stresses of life, think about it. What is the main cause of it? The main cause of it is to think that I am the body, and what relates to the body is all mine. My possessions, it's mine. Aham mameti. My family relationships, my country, my world, from global pollution to the local health issue. Everything gives a stress. That's the subject matter. Ahead, Lord Shri Krishna describes the features of Super Soul. Now, how Krishna defines is not very straightforward. However, Srila Prabhupada in his purport makes it very straightforward. Krishna kind of reveals the truth about Super Soul gradually. However, we will not go like that. We'll straightforward put it out. What are the features of Paramatma that Lord Shri Krishna discusses? But if you would have to read the verse number 13 to 19, and if you just read the Sanskrit and translation without reading the purports, you will be confused about what's going on. Is Krishna describing the features of Atma or Paramatma? So here, Lord Shri Krishna says features of Paramatma, omnipotent. We described this in the very beginning. Kshetragya, and we gave an example of farmer and the king, where the farmer knows only about his land, whereas a king knows about all the lands. Similarly, Atma knows only about one kshetra, the kshetra that it has acquired, whereas Paramatma knows about all the kshetras because everything belongs. So omnipotent, in other words, he knows everything. Some of the examples, he accepts our offering. There are many cases like this. Where a devotee have offered a food and the deity form of the Lord have actually eaten the food. I'm not going to go into the stories here right now of all those. Here to our prayers. Any classic example that comes to mind where the devotee prayed and the Lord heard and Lord immediately appeared? Draupadi. Krishna was sitting in Dwarka, so far away. And as soon as Draupadi raised her hands, Krishna, Govinda, Madhusudana, immediately Lord appeared. Sees all our activities. Paramatma, omnipotent, yes or no? And like this are described. And also, Cease all our activities means the law of karma, right? That's how the law of karma functions. And all pervading is the next thing that Krishna defines. All pervading means the Virat Roop, the 11th chapter Lord Shri Krishna had discussed. Let's move ahead in this discussion. Further qualities of super soul is transcendental, which means never gets affected by the modes of material nature. Now, what is this modes of material nature and how they bind us? This 13th chapter is going to introduce it. And 14th chapter, Lord Shri Krishna would describe in detail, which is the most fascinating chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which we'll be discussing tomorrow. And you can very easily relate to it. It's a great psychology which is described in this 14th chapter. We'll see that tomorrow. Beyond sense perception, which means you cannot perceive through your gross senses. That is what means beyond sense perception. Undivided. What does undivided means? An example of a sun is given, means sun rays. By sun rays, the sun pervades all over the universe. But sun remains at its own place, undivided, which means Lord Shri Krishna, Lord Shri Krishna is the cause of the whole creation, the cause of all the living entities, yet he remains a complete unit. Simple example given is if you have 50 rupees and if you give 25 rupees to someone else, how much Lakshmi would you have remaining? It's a basic question, right? I'm not going to wait for your answer. It's a simple mathematics. That's the point. We will not have 50 rupees remaining. But undivided means Lord Shri Krishna still remains the complete. And I've just quoted a verse from the invocation of Ishopanishad, where it is described how Krishna is complete despite complete units manifesting from him. Om Poonam Madha Poonam Idam Poonat Poonamudachyate Poonasya Poonamadaya Poonameva Vashishyate. So Lord is complete despite complete units manifesting from him. So a question arises. How do I understand the object of knowledge? Which means both. What is the object of knowledge? Gnayam. What is that is called as object of knowledge is to understand Atma and Paramatma. How do we understand it? Is it really possible by our research? It's very, very difficult. It's possible, but very difficult. It can take a long, long time. And Srila Prabhupada gives it a very simple answer. Quoting Srila Prabhupada, somehow or other, if one meets a saintly person and achieves his favor, then the entire mission of one's human life is fulfilled. Srimad Bhagavatam, which we are discussing every morning these days, have so many stories of how a life of an ordinary person got transformed by an association of a saintly person. However, I'm not going to quote anything from the past. I would like to quote something from in the very recent history. It's not that Srila Prabhupada's association was powerful. As we all know, Srila Prabhupada went to the West and he revolutionized the consciousness of the whole world by his world tours and created devotees all over the world and established 108 temples. So yes, Srila Prabhupada's physical presence was incredible and very potent. But as much as Srila Prabhupada's physical presence was potent, Srila Prabhupada also invested that same spiritual energy in his books. Even in Prabhupada's absence, you can see how this Krishna conscious movement empowered under the guidance of Srila Prabhupada and through his representatives is being propagated all over the world. And particularly Srila Prabhupada gave great emphasis to his books. So here I want to give you one example of how one book, particularly Bhagavad Gita, revolutionized whole of Burma. So there was a medical conference happening in New York where the doctors, the very chosen doctors, the best of the doctors from all over the world had assembled. And there was a representative from Burma who had also visited. And right outside that conference hall was our eternal book distributors. And they were distributing Bhagavad Gita. So this man, the Burmese, this man, so the religion of Burma is you're Buddhist. So this devotee approached him and he said, "Sir, I have a special book for you." He said, "What is this?" He said, "This is Song of God." He said, "Oh, really? Who is the author of it?" And this devotee said, "The author of this is Lord Buddha." Now, is that a lie or is that a fact? Tell me yes or no. It's a fact. Buddha is one of the incarnation of the Lord. So he thought, oh, really? Buddha have written this book? And the devotee said, yes, you have not read it? What kind of Buddhist you are? So he got a little bit, pitched. He said, no, I'll read it. And he took a book. However, in that exchange of interaction, the distributor unfortunately handed him a book in Hindi rather than in English. And because this person was also getting late for the conference, he went running inside and didn't notice. He packed in his luggage, brought it back to Burma. And one day he decided to open this book written by Buddha, the words of Buddha. And when he opened, he saw, oh, this is not English, or this is not in the Buddhist language. This is rather in Hindi language. It's a different language altogether. So he had a Hindu friend, Buddhist, living in Burma, and he decided to give it to him who understood Hindi language. So this book came from New York, ended in Burma, in a house of a Buddhist, born and brought up in Burma, and went from there to another person who was of a Hindu background, but practicing Buddhism, who understood Hindi language. He got this copy of Bhagavad Gita, he read it, he became a devotee, and he went on to start not one, multiple temples in Burma. Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki. That's the glory. Just one book, Bhagavad Gita, brought about the revolution. So that's the subject matter. How to understand this soul and Paramatma, Atma Paramatma? It all depends on association. Like there are two kinds of Bhagavad, person Bhagavad and book Bhagavad. So we gave you an example of book Bhagavad, and person Bhagavad examples we have already given in the past, like that. After this, Lord Shri Krishna begins to speak about the last two questions. So we have already discussed four questions. Kshetra, Kshetragya. Kshetra means the body. Jnana means the knower of the body, Atma and Paramatma. Jnanam, what is the process of knowledge? And Gnayam, what is the object of knowledge? Means what are you trying to understand through that knowledge? Is Atma and Paramatma. And the last two remaining questions of Arjuna are Purush and Prakriti. What is this Purush and Prakriti? And that brings us to the last section of this 13th chapter. So congratulations, 75% of your Gurukul study or Vedic study is done. Only 25% is remaining. So don't sign out before you complete this. Because if you don't understand this, then you have not understood anything. This is the most important subject matter. Who is the enjoyer? E stands for enjoyer. So here, this chapter concludes with the question on Purush and Prakriti. As you know, the living entity, every living entity desires to have more and more control, have more and more possession, and consider himself or herself to be the enjoyer. So Prakriti refers to material nature, and Purusha refers to enjoyer. So the question arises, are we the Purusha? And if we say, I am not talking on male and female, huh? Please, I'm not talking on the gender here. This is not Purush and Prakriti. Purush is not refers to male, what we know of, not to Prakriti refers to female. So Purush and Prakriti. Prakriti refers to material nature. Prakriti means which is enjoyed. And Purusha means who enjoys. You got the point? I hope that makes it clear. So Purusha, everyone, either you be a male or a female or old man or a young man or whoever, whichever gender, you're genderless also in that case. We have now genderless also. So whichever case you are, everyone is trying to enjoy. Yes or no? So in this subject matter, I'm going to talk about 6 topics. So let's pay attention. If you understand this, it's a fantastic. All glories to you, I would say. So the very first thing, this nature of a Jivatma to enjoy Prakriti is what causes its bondage or is the cause of its entanglement within this material world. It's like, there's a tied knot. The more the Jivatma tries to enjoy Prakriti, the more he gets entangled. It's like a spider cobweb. Have you seen a mosquito or an ant? Not an ant, yeah, a big ant, but a mosquito, a fly getting caught in a spider web? And the more it tries to move around, what happens? The more it gets entangled. Similarly is what happens to us. And in this context, Narad Muni speaks a very beautiful verse in Srimad Bhagavatam. He says, Samsara chakra etasmin janturajnana mohita Brahmayam sukham cha dukkham cha Bhunkate sarvatra sarvada. Samsara chakra, as you can see, the moving wheel, it represents birth, death, old age, and disease, and again, reincarnation, going on and going. This is the samsara chakra. Jantur ajnana mohita, the jantu means living entity out of ignorance. Brahmayam sukham cha dukkham cha. He wanders into this creation in search of happiness. Sometimes he gets happiness, sometimes he gets distress. Bhunkate sarvatra sarvada. And like this, at all times, at all places, he goes on sometimes enjoying and sometimes suffering. And his enjoyment and his suffering is dependent on his past activities. So this is from 6th canto. So the very first subject matter in this topic, who is the enjoyer? Now you may say, Prabhuji, what is your problem? क्या फालतू में आप enjoyership को लेके पीछे पड़ गए? What is the difficulty? If I say I'm the enjoyer, well, I'm not saying I'm the enjoyer, but in case if you think you're also to be the enjoyer. So let's talk about it. If all of us right now begin to think if we are the enjoyer, I need to enjoy, let's talk about the first point. After all, resources are limited. Yes or no? How much can we enjoy? Now, because resources are limited and there are so many people who want to exploit, what was going to happen? The reality check is this is what leads to competition and exploitation. And this is what is the cause of all pollution and suffering in today's society. Yes or no? You may write it on the chat box so I know it's making sense to you. So what are the difficulties? First, resources are not unlimited. Resources are limited. And second difficulty, we cannot even enjoy it forever. Let's say you have an unlimited supply of gulab jamun. Just imagine. And if for instance, gulab jamun is your favorite sweet, and you have an unlimited supply of gulab jamun, and only supply of gulab jamun, nothing else. You can only eat gulab jamun and nothing else. Well, if this proposition is given to you in the beginning, it will sound like fantastic, isn't it? Really? Unlimited gulab jamun? Yes, I would like it. But if it is told, that's it, nothing else. In the beginning, you may not think of anything else. You think only of the enjoyment you will get by eating gulab jamun. Imagine eating gulab jamun only for your breakfast, lunch, dinner, day after day. How many of you think would you still be relishing gulab jamun? Not at all. That's the point. We cannot enjoy it forever. That's the first thing. Second thing, our ability to enjoy is also limited. How many of you know you're growing old? Raise your hands. Thank you. I'm so proud. At least this recognition is there. And that's the whole point. As we are growing old, our senses are becoming more feeble, more weak. You see this? I have 2 extra eyes. Some of you may also have it. So that's the whole point about it. We cannot. And as a result, it leads to frustration and dissatisfaction. I particularly put a photo, some of you may or may not recognize. He is an ex-CEO of Nokia, Steve Ballmer. 2013, he fired 25,000 employees and he sold off Nokia to Microsoft at an market evaluation of only, I believe, 20%. What was the valuation value of $50 billion? Microsoft purchased Nokia only for $8 billion or something. They lost everything. And while announcing this takeover of Microsoft from Nokia, Steve Ballmer in that conference, he cried and he said, we didn't do anything wrong. We just didn't do anything wrong, but we lost it. That's the whole point. Whoever you are, we just cannot continue to enjoy forever. You be the prime minister, the president, the king of the whole world, or you may be the owner of a big company. Finally, death will come and give us such a tight slap that we are rendered helpless. We don't know what to do. Even if you're the wealthiest person, still you cannot buy a moment of your life. Yes or no? That's how we are not actually the enjoyer. That's the whole point. So who is the enjoyer? It is Ishwar. It is Krishna. That's the reason he is called as Parama Purusha. He is the supreme person. We are not Purusha. We are actually Prakriti. What is Prakriti? Energies of the Lord. Just like material nature, 7th chapter, verse number 4 and 5. Krishna says, material nature is my Prakriti, my energy. Similarly, in 5th verse, Krishna says, Jivatmas also are my energies. And Krishna says, Jivatmas are my superior energy. and Prakriti is my inferior energy. So that's the point about it. So it is Krishna, or super soul in that sense, is the enjoyer. So question comes, how can I enjoy? The enjoyment is a need of the soul. Sat Chit Ananda. Ananda, everyone wants to be happy. This is nothing wrong. So how can I enjoy? And here you'll find a very interesting verse, as you can hopefully see on the slide up, where it is a verse which Narad Muni again speaks, and he says, Yatha taroramur nischanena tarapyanti taskanda bujopashakha pranopahara chayatendriyana tathaiva sarvaranam achyutechya. And in essence, Narad Muni is saying, just like you pour the water to the root of the tree, everything in the tree is nourished. The branches, the twigs, the fruits, the leaves, the trunk, everything is nourished. So we are like the twigs. Our existence in this creation depends entirely on the Supreme Lord. So as we water, as we nourish the root of the tree, as we serve the Lord, as you water the tree, everything else gets nourished. Similarly, as we serve the Lord, that is where we find our greatest satisfaction. Just like this whole body, when you eat, it is the belly that digests and that gives the energy and nourishment to the whole body. Yes or no? Imagine your hand say, aha, nahi dunga. मैं करता हूँ सारी मेहनत, मैं उठाता हूँ, I take it. And now you ask me to give it to the mouth. And imagine mouth says, aha, I chew, I do all the work. But somebody else gets to digest, I will not do it. Imagine if this all is going to happen, who is going to suffer? If the food doesn't go to the belly, if there is no digestion, who suffers? The hand suffers, the mouth suffers, and different limbs of the body suffers. And that is a cause of our suffering. That's the whole point about it. Second concept, and this is very interesting in the last section of this of the 13th chapter. Why do bad things happen to good people? In other words, who is responsible for our suffering? And here we're going to speak on the subject of Jiva in this world and its relationship. First, Prakriti Purusha, which means here Purusha indicates to Atma also. So Param Purusha and Purusha in the context. So what is the relationship between this Jiva and Prakriti? Material nature and living entity, the energies of the Lord, are eternal. However, the fact is, Purusha, actual Purusha is Lord, whereas Jiva is trying to usurp that position. So here, question arises: what is the purpose of this whole material creation? So verse number 13, verse number 20 describes the relationship between Jivas and the Prakriti. And question arises: what is the purpose of this whole material creation? And here, Prabhupada and the purpose describe what is the purpose. And Prabhupada writes, to give rebellious Jiva, who is not willing, like a hand who is not willing to cooperate with the body, by feeding the body, by feeding the belly. So to give this rebellious Jiva a chance to reform his or her behavior and to return back to the spiritual world. Everything has its purpose. Similarly, this creation is not just a random explosion called as Big Bang Theory. It's bizarre. It's rather preposterous to cause something like that. To consider all of you are beautiful living entities and this whole beautiful creation created by an explosion. What a sad joke. I mean, where's the scope and intelligence here to call it like that, that this whole creation came because of an explosion. So everything has its purpose, and that is what Bhagavad Gita teaches. And the purpose of this creation of this universe is to help reform our behavior like this. So historically, as we see, historically, what I'm going to say, incidentally, notably, whatever you call it, we all are here in this material world still. In other words, let me put this point before. This material world is also compared to a university. Just like in a university, unless you pass the final exam, you don't graduate. You might have had friends who were really, really attached to the university campus, and they continue to spread almost a decade, which means they continue to fail year after year, and they never left the campus. So this world is also created compared to a university where we all have a final exam called as a death. Our success or failure depends on what we remember at the end of life. And if we had been successful, then none of you would be sitting here because we failed. That's the reason we are again readmitted. Now, I don't know which degree or which year of the college you are, depends on the level of consciousness. Because all of us are sitting here, it means all in our previous lives, we have failed. And Kali Yuga, anyways, makes it very difficult because in current day and time is a world of the time of great distractions and disturbances and temptations. Therefore, to help us pass in current day and time required a special mercy, special grace marks in our college. We need a special concession from our teacher. And therefore, Lord Shri Krishna in Kali Yuga appeared in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he brought this concession. He didn't brought the concession. He said, just go and sit in the exam hall. Don't even sit. Just mark your attendance. I will do the needful, which means at least start to chant the holy names of the Lord. How easy could be than this? And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore introduced the holy names of the Lord. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, as a means for a quick deliverance. Jiva, in this world, why do bad things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people, as we're discussing? Who is responsible of our suffering? So nothing happens by chance. I'll give you a brief, it's a subject matter of detail, but give you a brief. Nothing happens by chance. Effect, the body, what we have, is the result of, or is given to us by material nature. But what is the cause of this body? Is our own karmas. Got the point? Is our own karmas which creates another set of body. Either pious karma or sinful karma, either of it will give us next body. Therefore, Krishna says in the first section of Bhagavad Gita, perform a karma, which means devotional activities or in devotional mood when you engage yourself in day-to-day activities. Every effect has a cause. That's the point. So what is the actual cause? Yeah, that's what we discussed. Who is the actual cause? Is I, Jiva. We all have a freedom to choose to terminate our existence in material world or continue living in this campus for however long we want. And it's not a good place. Dukhalayama Shashvatam, Krishna described. Third subject matter. Where is my freedom? Am I really freed? And Lord Shri Krishna talks about the subject matter in terms of verse number 22, where he says, all of us are greatly influenced and bound by the chains of the modes of material nature, which will be the discussion of tomorrow's session. So I'll elaborate that tomorrow. Next, not only this, if we consider ourselves truly free, to think about it, whatever we desire, why our desires are not fulfilled? Yes or no? What is the meaning of freedom? That I could live the way I wanted. I could have anything in my life I wanted. All my desires should be fulfilled. Yes, correct? But that's not the case. Now, to give you a medical fact, in this whole body, although we like to believe I am the controller, we only have 5% control on this body, which is called as conscious activity. And 95% activities of the body are happening unconsciously. How many of you are conscious of your breathing? Yes, no, quick. How many of you are conscious of the flipping of your eyebrows? How many of you are monitoring your blood pressure and the movements of your blood in your body? None of you. Better you don't do it. Imagine if you had to become the controller of your breathing, that you decide when to breathe in. No, you cannot decide, but you have to consciously breathe in and breathe out, which means you can never sleep. And this is a disease. We discuss about the subject matter in details in mind management series of talk, but that's the point. So who is controlling? Krishna says in verse number 23, very, very important verse. Actually, I am the overseer, permitter, and the supreme enjoyer. Who's regulating the functions of the heart? You want a break when you go to office. Imagine if your heart demands a break from you. Anyways, it's not going to demand a break from you. Whenever he decides, he breaks, and then you call heart attack, right? So if a heart has to take a break, has to pause for a second, that's called heart attack. So who is managing this complex body to function in its own capacity? Krishna says, I am the overseer, I am the permitter. And that's the whole point. So I hope it helps you understand that we are totally dependent on the material nature and the Lord. Point 4, 3 doers. I will not go in details because we had already discussed the subject matter at length in the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where the soul, a living entity, only has a role of desiring, and according to past activities and karma, Lord sanctions and then tells the material nature to provide resources so that those desires can be fulfilled. In other words, we as an individual, what we need to take control of? Our desires. That's what we need to monitor. That's not we need to work on. And how our desires are cultivated? Desires are cultivated by our association. If we have a saintly association, we'll cultivate desires of spiritual life, God consciousness. And if we have bad association, then accordingly we'll have desires of greed, lust, and anger. So this graph we have discussed before, so I'm skipping through it. Elaborately talked in 5th chapter. So finally, Arjuna pondered, my dear Lord, how would a common man ever understand the subject matter? This isn't easy to understand Atma and Paramatma. And Lord Shri Krishna speaks about it, how to understand from verse number 25 to 26. And I'll give you a summary slide of it where Krishna says, hey Arjuna, bhakti is the easiest path, as you can see up. Bhakti is the easiest path, and Krishna gives the conclusive advice. Take shelter of pure devotee. Hear from him about self-realization. Follow in his footsteps. What is hearing? What is the importance of hearing? The culture of hearing is what we need to create in our life. And that hearing, the culture of hearing, gives us knowledge, transcendental knowledge. And that transcendental knowledge brings about transformation and gives us a transcendental vision by which, just like a child comes back to home, sees a father's car key, immediately remembers father. So when we have heard properly from bona fide sources, when we look at the beautiful nature, then we immediately remember the painter. When we see the suffering, then we remember this is a function of the material energy. But who is the cause of it? That same individual, because must have done something in the past, which means when I get suffering, I understand there's no one to blame. This whole idea of victim mentality does not hold true, because ultimately we all are responsible for all our actions. And finally, what is the vision of transcendentalist? And Lord Shri Krishna concludes the 13th chapter saying that a transcendentalist is a true seer who can distinguish between the spirit and the matter. He is the one who can see what is Atma and what is Paramatma, and he knows it is only the body that acts. I do not act. In the essence, what are the activities of the soul? Krishna says, the soul does nothing nor mixes with anything, but it does, however, illumine the body with consciousness. So what is death? When consciousness is withdrawn and when Atma departs, that is called as death. So in essence, this, as I said, is the most technical subject matter of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13. Here we discussed the acronym for this chapter was WISE, where W stood for wise questions, where Arjuna asked 6 questions: Purusha, Prakriti, Kshetra, Kshetragya, Jnanam, and Gneyam. And Lord Shri Krishna in that section described what is Kshetra and Kshetragya. And then how do we acquire? What is the process of knowledge? How do I gain knowledge? How can I understand spiritual subject matter? That is called as Jnanam. Lord Shri Krishna emphasized on items of knowledge, which means character. And the foremost of it is humility, which starts with taking shelter of Guru. And that is called an essential quality. And the most important is to become a devotee of the Lord. When we do so, all the good qualities are naturally appear within us. And then what is Gneyam? What is the purpose? What is the object of knowledge? And that brings us to the 3rd section, soul and super soul. What are the features of the soul? What are the features of the super soul? And that is our object of knowledge. And finally, Lord Shri Krishna speaks about Purush and Prakriti, not male and female, but Prakriti refers to what is being enjoyed, and Purush means who enjoys. There is Param Purush, that is Krishna, and we living entities are not Purusha, but we are Prakriti, who are energies of the Lord, just like material nature. And the cause of our suffering is because we are trying to become an artificial Purusha. We have accepted a role that doesn't belong to us. That's the reason we are frustrated and dissatisfied. And in this subject matter, we are discussed on 6 topics. Are we really the enjoyer? Why do bad things happen to good people? Where is my freedom? Like that. And with this, we come to a conclusion of this 13th chapter. Thank you all for staying alive with us all through this discussion. I went 15 minutes ahead. I mean, come on, you can't give a whole Vedic knowledge in less than 1 hour, so you have to bear with it. So tomorrow we'll meet and discuss the most fascinating subject matter of Bhagavad Gita, the modes of material nature. With that, I thank you all for joining us for today evening Gita Essence session. And with this, we conclude here for today. Thank you so much. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki, Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki. I would let the host direct me if there is anything for me to contribute further.
Hare Krishna. If anyone has any questions, let me know. I will unmute them.
All right. So, so fine. It's a little difficult subject. So, is it fine? No questions right now. Thank you all for joining. Hare Krishna. Krishna willing, we'll see you tomorrow, hopefully. Yes.
We have Vinay Prabhu raising his hand. Prabhu, I will unmute you. Please ask your question.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Sorry, actually I have a question from chapter 11, but nobody has seen. Actually, Prabhu, in the chapter 11, when Arjuna confesses to Lord Krishna that I have done so many things, thinking you as a friend, that is like just like me. So actually, there I have a small doubt, because in Mahabharata and in Bhagavatam, there are some stories which directly gives to Arjuna that Krishna is not the normal human being. He is a supreme personality of Godhead, even before the Mahabharata war. Just like in the Rajasuya Yajna, when Bhishma
Noted.
says,
Correct. That's point noted. So, what's the question?
so at that time, Arjuna knows that Krishna is a supreme personality of Godhead, and he is in Sakyaras with Krishna, and he is performing the same things. But how he has felt that he just came to know Krishna, not only the supreme personality of God.
I have a counter question to you. Does Mother Yashoda knows Krishna is a supreme Lord? Yes or no?
That is also a question, Prabhu.
Yeah, that's the whole point. So the answer to this question that you've asked is, see, Krishna's activities and leelas are performed under his internal energy. And internal energy functions in a way which increases the pleasure of the Lord. So when there is a need for a devotee to behave in a way where he sees Krishna in awe and reverence, then internal energy reveals that wisdom to the devotee that Krishna is actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Where the need of the hour is, where the devotee deals with Krishna in a Vatsalya bhava and a Sakya bhava, or where he forgets the position of Krishna and stops seeing him in awe and reverence, then again the internal energy covers the intelligence of a devotee and makes him see Krishna just like a son or a husband or a friend.
Okay.
So these are the dynamics of the internal energy of the Lord.
Okay. Prabhu, the second question, Prabhu. Sorry.
All right.
Okay. Well, Prabhu, in the Paramatma form, the Lord is in the personal future. That means he is having the Chaturbhuja root and all these things. And the yogis who meditate on the Paramatma, what that means? My question is: suppose Lord Narayana is there. Lord Narayana is also in the Chaturbhuja root, and Lord Vishnu is also in the Chaturbhuja root. So, what is the difference that between the Lord Paramatma, that is Paramatma who is residing Shirodhara Vishnu, the 400 form, in our heart? Suppose a person is having relation with the Paramatma and the Lord Narayana, because I think that's a question, Prabhu, because one is 400 form of Lord which is in the heart, and one is 400
There is
form of the Lord who is
no
in the Vaikuntha.
there is no difference. These are the steps of realization of God. Brahman, then Paramatma, and then Bhagwan realization. So some people go through this process of getting the Brahman realization and then Paramatma realization, where they realize the presence of Atma, Paramatma in their heart. And then they further graduate to where they can have a relationship with the Lord, as you're talking about Vaikuntha. And there is a process of bhakti where they directly serve the Lord, knowing the Lord having a personal form and worship in the form of the Lord of the Vaikuntha.
So
Got the
it's only
point?
reciprocation that matters.
It's a process, it's a path that that individual have taken to understand the absolute truth. If somebody has taken a bhakti path, then he doesn't go through Brahman and Paramatma realization. He directly knows that Vishnu is there in Vaikuntha, Narayan is in Vaikuntha, and what is the mood in Vaikuntha? Dasya bhava, awe and reverence. So he worships the Lord in that mood. But what you're talking about Paramatma and that stages of realization, there, this is a path for a Jnani or Ashtanga Yogi and Ityadis or etc. different paths of yoga. There, a person gradually rises up to levels of realization. Brahman, then Paramatma realization. So that depends on the path, the spiritual process that you have taken. If you only have a Paramatma realization, what can you do for Paramatma? What service can you render for Paramatma?
That's what I'm asking. It's reciprocation, or reciprocation is the thing that is difference between Paramatma realization and Bhagwan realization.
Yeah, that is also there, and service also there. Because when it's Paramatma realization, you can only meditate on Paramatma.
Okay.
When there is a personal form of the Lord, then you can dress him, you can fan him, you can serve him. All right?
Thank you, Hare Krishna. Prabhu.
Thank you, Minakji, for your thoughtful questions. So, can I just see who all were there for today's session? Hare Krishna. If our friends can, for a second, switch on their cameras. So, I'm going to ask a little tricky question. How many of you kind of understood something, if not everything? You can say, okay, Prabhu, I got something, maybe 20%, 30%, 50%. So give me a thumbs up if you understood more than 50%. Okay, for you to give me a thumbs up, you have to switch on your camera. Okay, so you raise your thumbs up like this. So I can see. Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. I'm encouraged. But in case, if you would like to study the subject matter in detail, I would encourage you to refer to our Gita Life recordings, where there are almost 4 sessions on the subject matter, where it's more elaborate and detailed. It will help you to comprehend the subject matter more. All right, so with that, thank you all.